So, welcome everyone. Again, for those who don't know me, my name is Mark Berdler, and I cover global software for Bernstein. It's with my distinct pleasure to welcome Takashi Numoto, Corporate VP of Cloud and Enterprises. Takashi has been with Microsoft since 1997 and brings to today's discussion deep knowledge of Microsoft's commercial products and commercial cloud solutions. And since he doesn't have a jacket on, I'll take mine off and roll my sleeves up so we can hold it.
Sorry.
It's okay. I want to be relaxed, and we'll lay into lots of interesting questions. So what I'm going to start off with is some what I would call almost speed dating questions, flash questions to get some quick answers to some questions that investors have asked us. At a high level, if you can give it a couple questions,
Choose a mic.
What makes up...
Sir?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay,
Cool.
thank you. Better? I apologize. I'd like to start at a high level with what makes up Microsoft's cloud platforms. What are the products?
When we talk externally about Microsoft Cloud and cloud run rate as a revenue metric as an example, we're talking about the commercial cloud service offerings we have. So that includes things like Azure and inclusive of all the underlying offers that it has, like EMS or Power BI, as well as Office 365 and Dynamics 365.
Excellent. At a high level, why do you have so many data center regions worldwide?
Well, it's really customer demand driven in the sense that, our customers' needs in terms of their IT environments and what they look for is very, very complex. So whether it be from regulatory requirements like data residency or the ability to really have data centers close to wherever they want to deploy their applications and solutions, that's kind of what we look at in terms of given our customers the option to be able to deploy their solutions and their applications closer to either their employees or their markets that they're trying to address.
So how big is a data center region or a data center, and are they comparable between what Microsoft and Amazon and Google might build?
One thing I first want to clarify is when we talk about 38 regions for Azure, which is kind of something you may have heard about, region is not a data center. Region is essentially a logical representation of one or more data centers. So we typically set up, there are some regions that are represented by huge data centers where one large data center is a region, but there are other cases where more typically, we're aggregating multiple data center locations so that they're within network latency proximity such that we can logically represent it as one logical data center, and we call that a region. And we have 38 of them announced in the world, and that's more than basically what all of our competition offers by a wide margin. And again, like I said, the reason we offer this is because we are really geared towards the enterprise needs. And when you think about one of the key reasons enterprise customers look to us is the ability for them to deploy their applications and solutions closer to where they need to have their application solutions deployed. We are also unique in the sense that we offer, essentially, we're the only global provider that is legally licensed to operate our cloud services and offer them in China. We offer that through a partner called 21Vinet. And we also have a unique, essentially a data trustee model in Germany, where we have data center offerings in Germany where the data controlled in terms of access to the data is controlled by our partner and not by Microsoft directly. And that gives them, particularly customers in Germany and Europe, additional isolation in terms of data sovereignty needs.
So, great. Thank you. How big is your data center footprint? I mean, could we say it's built to support 10% of the world's compute? I mean, what's a fair metric of what you've built to date?
We can share with you a bunch of the collateral we have in terms of the sheer scale of our data center because it is quite impressive. Sometimes people talk about the cloud and, a lot of people immerse in kind of things like a server room and then think, well, we have a cloud too. But, the sheer scale of our data centers and let alone the sheer scale of regions that aggregates multiple data centers is quite staggering. We can sort of show you sort of video reels that talks about, the amount of concrete used in just one data center, the number of cabling that's used in one data center that can exceed, essentially, that can circumvent, encircle the Earth multiple times and things like that. And the scale is quite impressive.
Okay. Is any sense in terms of, is it built out to capture some big portion of the world capacity?
I think your kind of question implies that the cloud is largely a mere shift from on-prem. So for us, and the customer adoption pattern bear this out. Cloud can, of course, be a place where you shift your workloads, but so many times cloud is also a place where you do net new things that just you didn't do before. If you want to do advanced analytics, or if you want to learn have a machine learning cluster that you want to apply against your data, they may not have been activities that were done on-prem. So we're certainly not thinking about building out our data center capacity as a percentage of the world's computing capacity or even on-prem capacity. We're just really doing it on the basis of customer demand, and then basically scaling to meet the needs of the customer demand. And the consumption growth for Azure has been very substantial. In Q1, I think we talked about our Azure compute growth doubling year over year again, and the overall consumption growth was around over 120% year over year. So we're basically looking at, hey, we're seeing all this customer interest in consumption growth across the world, and how do we keep up with the capacity? And we don't think about it in the ratio that you talked about.
Okay, that's fair. A little more detail. Where are we in the Azure adoption cycle? Is this still the early adopter, the guys kicking tires? Is this enterprises running large production enterprise workloads? How should we think?
I would say it's certainly not just the quote-unquote early adopters.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, I don't know, what the best, one way to think about it is almost like early innings if you play baseball.
Okay.
So everybody's playing the game.
Okay.
Everybody's into the game now, with varying degrees. Some of the customers are starting with, sort of the tiptoe in the water, maybe with fast applications like Office 65, or just on Azure, maybe something like disaster recovery. And then there are other customers that are far deeper into it in terms of really deploying mission-critical applications like SAP and running that in Azure. And so the question is essentially, my answer to the question is, the participation in the cloud is really taking off across our customer base. The degree of which and the sophistication with which they do it is still highly variable, but the level of participation into the cloud, I think, has broadened dramatically over the last year or so.
Okay, and you expect that to continue, obviously?
Yes.
Good, excellent. What is Microsoft's cloud value proposition to customers versus some sort of an enterprise software vendor, a Workday or some other vendor? And in the future, do you see customer using multiple clouds like Azure or AWS for compute and Oracle, Workday for apps, or how do you think of the world moving over the next number of years?
The journey that we see customers going on, their entry point into the journey to the cloud could be different depending on the customer. Some customers may start by introducing SaaS applications into their environment, whether it be Office 365 or Dynamics 365. That may be one part of their journey. Or they might start with infrastructure first and may start with something like storage or disaster recovery. Or they might actually start using the cloud in terms of developing net new applications that's sort of hard to conceive of actually or deploy on-prem, and particularly around things like new data and AI type applications. And so whether you start with a SaaS first or infrastructure first or net new application in the cloud first, what we see customers evolving to is that they end up needing all three. So you might actually start with one of these three different scenarios, but over time, customers will essentially need all these, whether it's a SaaS thing or IaaS thing or net new application development platform thing. And we see this in the customer number. So in Q1, for example, we talked about how of the Fortune 500 companies, not only do we have 90+% of our customers, 90+% of our Fortune 500 customers running their business on Microsoft Cloud, and over 60% of them are running three or more of the Microsoft Cloud offerings, which is basically a 20-point improvement year over year. And it kind of goes to show us the customer may start in one of the different entry points, but actually evolving to use more of it. And so compared to other application-centric vendors, our really approach is we're far more comprehensive, and that's why we see even partners like SAP basically bring their application to run on Azure. We've made some announcements on this a few weeks ago. And no applications, as you know, in the enterprise stands alone. They're never in a silo. They have to be integrated with different applications. The data needs to be shared across different applications. And there's a huge role that a horizontal application platform and a cloud platform like Azure can play. And of course, if the customers want to go essentially deploy a SaaS application purely with SAP or Workday, we will actually have connectors and other integration points, whether it be things like Active Directory, to go integrate. So we want to make sure all customers have a way to use Azure, whether it's conjunction with an existing SaaS app or using Azure as a horizontal line of business platform.
Okay. Now, drilling into one of the numbers, you said that 60% of the customers are running, of the 90% of the Fortune 500 are running 3 or more solutions. But that's still, again, in early innings within their opportunity to build out and use Azure, correct?
Yeah, first of all, the 60% isn't within the 90%,
okay.
So it's actually 60%
of
the
okay.
base. And when we talk about 3, it is true that there's even within the 60 that's already using 3 of our services, we have a lot of consumption growth opportunities because they may be starting to use one of the 3 services, but
right.
they can use more of that volume of that same service in addition to consuming more of our service. So there's a lot of opportunity there.
Excellent. Can you provide a sense of the opportunity for Azure from third-party SaaS and solution vendors building and running on top of Azure? You gave SAP as an example. How big of what's going to run or you think could run on Azure is going to be other SaaS vendors?
I'm not quite sure I get particularly fixated on the notion of a SaaS or not. It is interesting to really think about the opportunity we have for how essentially the enterprise ISV application can essentially move to take advantage of something like Azure. So given the historical relationship we have with so many of the enterprise ISV, we have an opportunity to work with them and talk about how their enterprise ISV solution can take advantage of the cloud, and they can also move from essentially an on-prem business model to one in the cloud. So as an example, Esri delivers their geospatial solutions on top of Azure. They've historically been an on-prem solution, but now they're bringing their cloud solution to the cloud. Temenos, as a core banking solution, has historically been an on-prem solution. They're working with us to essentially deliver that via the cloud. And so we have an opportunity to think about whether it's delivered as a sort of a multi-tenant SaaS application or delivered as essentially a cloud-hosted solution that isn't necessarily SaaS or multi-tenant. There's a huge opportunity for us to work with enterprise ISVs to bring their solutions to Azure and help them essentially transform their business. At the same time, we also have an opportunity to work with net new ISVs that are net new to the world or are developing net new solutions, and we can offer them sort of a faster and hopefully a better chance of succeeding in the marketplace because they can use Azure to integrate with enterprise environments. Most enterprise customers, for example, don't necessarily want to set up another directory or authentication scheme with a new SaaS vendor, particularly if you are an established player. And so we can offer them help by saying, hey, if you integrate with Azure and Azure AD as an example, you can offer a sort of a unified authentication scheme to your application that the enterprise CIOs and CISOs will like to be able to manage your applications. And so we have an opportunity to onboard net new enterprise ISVs to Azure as well. So both whether it be helping transform existing enterprise ISVs or bringing net new enterprise ISVs into Azure, I think we have a great opportunity. And those, of course, all catalyze consumption of Azure.
And so following on that, why Azure versus some other cloud platform or building your own data center?
Well, I think it boils down to sort of 3 core things that we're focused on at the Microsoft Cloud level. It's not initially just an Azure statement, but it's a sort of a Microsoft Cloud statement that we're focused on. First, we talked about sort of our global scale and having this set level of regions so that you can actually have, that you can address your data residency needs. You can essentially have far more options than what the competition offers in terms of being able to deploy solutions and applications closer to where you need it, whether it be market or employees or partners. That's one advantage. And then we are very, very much focused on really making it easy for both our partners and customers to be able to trust our cloud implementation model. So trust is a huge deal and a key enterprise design point for us. So when you think about the work we do around security or the amount of compliance work we do, we have more compliance certifications than any other global cloud vendor. When you think about SOC or ISO or even vertical compliance standards like HIPAA or PCI or like you name it, and we have more of them than any of our competition, and that essentially lowers the barrier for both our customers and partners to use Azure, and that's a huge differentiation point. And then thirdly, I think a big one is really a deep notion of hybrid. For us, hybrid isn't just a mere notion of connecting public cloud to on-prem. It's not even about just moving a virtual machine between on-prem and the public cloud. It's far more of a complete consistency in the platform. So all the way from the application layer, from things like productivity or business application, data technologies like SQL, all the way down to identity and infrastructure. We provide a really consistent platform, and that essentially enables both our partners and customers to be able to have a much more flexible deployment model where you can focus on your app and then deploy, think about what the best way to deploy it. And those are three big differentiations we have versus the others.
Excellent. So does that then define the approach almost as you're giving clients a ramp to the cloud versus a rip and replace to the cloud?
Certainly that's part of it. Like I said, a lot of the cloud consumption is taking place not initially just as a lift and shift,
right,
but also using net new and also like new scenario that combines what you already have on-prem. So net new doesn't mean it's in isolation of on-prem. Oftentimes it shares data or it shares the technology that you already have on-prem and then using the cloud to extend it further.
So is that why you've been focusing so much energy on AI, is because in machine learning, because it creates new use cases?
Well, for us, like from a cloud perspective, consumption is almost our prime directive.
Right.
And so, we want to do everything we can to drive cloud adoption and consumption. And that could be by enriching new offerings, like delivering new offerings in use cases like AI.
Right.
Wouldn't you like to be able to add speech recognition to your application? What are the scenarios where face detection can be useful or emotion detection can be useful in your new applications? And we offer those as APIs that you can use to build apps on Azure. That certainly adds to the new scenario. And the business opportunity isn't just the monetization opportunity we have for the APIs we offer for that,
right,
but actually the broader application consumption that it brings on for sure. And similarly, that's why we're so focused on essentially expanding our TAM, so to speak, of our cloud offering by embracing OSS solutions. So
right,
when you think about, supporting all variants of Linux, including Red Hat, having not just the operating system support, but broad set of OSS technologies, whether it's on the data side like MySQL or Mongo, and sort of language and frameworks that a lot of the OSS developers are familiar with. We're spending a lot of time making sure that our SDKs for, PHP or Node.js and whatnot are all first class so that we can bring in more OSS developers into Azure. And that's certainly showing in customer adoption, because when you think about Azure VMs, over a quarter of the VMs running in Azure is Linux right now.
Right. So if you're opening up the opportunity for open source, you're opening it up for Linux, the SaaS guys many of them are running on Linux or other open source capabilities. Does that shrink the opportunity for Windows Server?
Not necessarily. When you think about, we as you might expect, we're fairly rigorous in tracking our install base and sort of share in the enterprise in terms of what percentage of the servers that's run in the enterprise is Windows versus Linux. And, we're not initially seeing a dramatic shift at all, and the Windows business in that regard continues to be pretty healthy. Even if you think about, our on-prem business results in Q1, we reported a double-digit growth in premium versions of our server products. Part of it is as customers become increasingly more sophisticated in their use of the cloud, they want on-prem technologies that are sort of more compatible and copacetic with the models in the cloud. and so that's driving sort of more of a higher edition adoption on our on-prem servers too. And so I don't necessarily think of the cloud transition as essentially a shrinkage of the Windows Server opportunity, but it's really certainly more of the cloud giving us an opportunity to participate in markets we haven't participated in before, and that's the Linux market, and that's where we're embracing.
Good. So following on that, should we feel as investors comfortable that Windows business is a continuing growing business, given all the puts and takes of everything else?
We certainly think about the lifetime value of a Windows Server.
Right.
And whether it be on-prem, and we have a very healthy ongoing mix of annuity, and we are actually doing things like Azure Hybrid Use Rights, which we're baking into the annuity business model, where if you essentially buy Windows Server, then you actually can take that license and deploy it to essentially run Windows Server more cheaply in Azure. And so we're basically, again, that's almost like you can think of it as a hybrid business model, and that's one way to make sure that our sort of the customer journey in the cloud is accretive to our business overall.
Excellent. So one more on Windows. How should we think about how much of the Windows Server use case is tied to hosting traditional Microsoft Windows workloads like Exchange and SharePoint, etc.?
When we look at the use cases, there's just a vast amount of long-tail applications that are deployed on Windows Server. Our first-party applications like SharePoint and Exchange are certainly important applications for us.
Right.
But in terms of the overall impact to the install base of all the Windows Server out there, I mean, I wouldn't say it's that dominant.
Okay. Changing gears, Dynamics. Investors haven't really focused yet on Dynamics, but yet this quarter you had a really good result on Dynamics CRM Online. The cloud version seemed to be growing very fast. Where is the focus for the Dynamics products? Is it mid-market? Is it enterprise? How should we think about it?
Well, I do think it's both. Like historically, you might be recalling that some of the assets originally that we started Dynamics business with were based on acquisitions that were more centered around mid-market.
Right.
And so that might cause you to have, hey, that's kind of a mid-market based asset. But when we think about our business growth, we're seeing really strong business growth in our what we would call the EPG space as well. And so increasingly, the Dynamics business is not just a mid-market business. It's certainly growing rapidly in the enterprise as well. And we've had some marquee wins, whether it's BHP, that's a switcher from Salesforce, or big customer like American Airlines adopting CRM. So we are seeing big adoption in the enterprise for sure.
And is that today it's predominantly Dynamics CRM? How do we think about it long term? Is it more of a mix of ERP? Is it new products within the Dynamics family?
Well, actually, one of the things we've most recently done, and so we should spend more time briefly on it,
yep.
is we've announced a new approach to our biz apps where we are now going out to market under the unified branding around Dynamics 365. And what we're doing there is to really break down sort of the vendor-imposed silos that exist in the market today, where there was a CRM and there's ERP, and that was treated completely differently. But that's kind of a segregation of duties and separation and segmentation was largely vendor-based. And when what the customer really wants is the ability to really think about, hey, how do I actually run the business in the best way possible, from essentially a lead all the way to cash. Right. And so we've now gone on to market, and it's available today in the market, called Dynamics 365, that essentially unifies the assets we've had traditionally in what we used to call Dynamics CRM, as well as our ERP assets, and basically having one unified cloud offering that can essentially handle the process end-to-end. And in addition to doing that, in addition to unifying sort of our CRM product and an ERP product, we've also done it in such a way so that it's not just this one large monolithic thing you have to buy. If you just want to start with customer service, if you just want to start with sales automation, if you just want to start with field service or project service automation, you can just get going with just a essentially the scenario you like, knowing fully well that the platform is fully integrated so that you can add additional business application, and then actually consume all of our capabilities. But we've done it in a way where you can actually start in a bite-sized way. And we think that the way we both approach the product and even the pricing model and the licensing modeling is quite disruptive to the marketplace, and we're quite bullish.
Excellent. So is that fully integrated just Dynamics 365, or does that span into then Office 365 with a similar name and Azure and other products?
Dynamics 365 is our unified biz app offering,
right,
from across sort of the CRM business processes all the way to operations,
right,
and finances. And that product as the biz app suite does integrate with Office 365. So there's a lot of capabilities that it offers where, if you get an email in Office 365 within Outlook, if there is let's say if the customer email includes a quote number or whatever,
right,
it will recognize that and essentially prompt that same quote from the backend system in Dynamics 365. So there's a lot of integration across the product, but Dynamics 365 does not encompass Office 365. Those are basically pure products that integrate across each other.
So future upsell opportunities.
Absolutely.
Okay. Can you give us a sense of the cross-sell advantages of having Office 365, Dynamics 365, Azure? How big do you think of it as being a sell a module and upsell to the other, or sell a suite? How big is that, and how sticky is that opportunity?
Well, I mean, some of the numbers I quoted, I think, sort of speak to this point where we are seeing more and more of our customers use multiple of our cloud offerings.
Right.
So, going to 60% of Fortune 500, 20 points increase over year is a substantial movement.
Right.
And I think it does speak to the power of really thinking about Microsoft Cloud holistically. I think I get a lot of questions from this community, right, that essentially attempts to take what I think of as a very narrow comparative view on Azure versus AWS, or Google versus Office 365 in a pretty category by category narrow way. But the real power that we are seeing in our customer adoption of the cloud is that they end up needing all of the elements of the cloud, and we're uniquely positioned to be able to address their need holistically, and the opportunity to be able to essentially address their needs across these different cloud needs that they have, and we're seeing that in the numbers, I think.
Excellent. So let me open up for a couple questions from the audience. Keep the questions short so I'll be able to make sure that I repeat it so it's on the mic. Thank you.
Can you talk about the decision-making process around insourcing your data center assets or outsourcing to third-party wholesale guys?
So the question is, can you go through the methodology or internal thinking in terms of insourcing your data centers versus outsourcing it?
Well, when you say insource and outsource, it sounds like you're asking kind of a lease or build kind of a question, because whether the facilities are leased or not, I want to make sure we actually do run the data center operations ourselves. So it's not like Azure data centers are somehow outsourced in terms of its operation, whether the underlying assets are leased or built ourselves. So that's one clarification I wanted to. And then it's really I hate that you might not like this answer, but it's really on a case-by-case basis. Sometimes we have to think about our ability to get to market quickly, and sometimes the lease might be a faster option. Build might take slightly longer, as you might imagine. If you think about the long-term cost, the build might be slightly cheaper. We have to think about all these elements, and then on a per country and per region basis, we think about what the best way are to do it. And none of the decisions are fixed in stone, in the sense that, again, a region encompasses multiple data centers. So that a given region might encompass data centers that have two different implementation models, that one's that's leased and one's built, but it's the one region that we represent to the customer. So really it's an implementation detail that we think about in a very case-by-case way.
Excellent. Follow-up, next question? Good, that's easy. Okay, so if we then look at the Microsoft Cloud vision, and we look at the commercial side of the business, what is your expectation of how fast that transformation to the cloud is, and is it going as fast as you'd like it to go?
Well, I guess we would always like it to go faster.
Right.
Right. If you just ask Satya, hey, your Azure growth is pretty substantial. Are you satisfied? He would say, hey, I want more.
Okay.
Of course he will say, I want more. He tells me I want more all the time. But overall, I think we are quite, encouraged by the growth we're seeing.
Right.
We are continuing to see triple-digit growth. In consumption, compute consumption, like I said, doubled year over year, and this is not the first time. It's been ongoing for quite a while, and we have a lot of work to do. But the notion of essentially having a real technology stack that we can bring to bear both in a public cloud that also has a consistent platform that customers use on-prem seem to be resonating. And that's really also helping, the cloud approach is also helping us address new TAMs that we didn't participate in before. So overall, I think we're quite bullish.
Excellent. So what would be the limiting factors or are there any, in continuing to grow at the rates you're growing within both the Azure business and the Office 365 business? Or maybe there aren't any.
Well, of course, we can always execute better and go faster.
Right.
And that's across both. On the Azure side, we need to do a great job of consistently balancing two key growth levers. One is to acquire new customers.
Right.
And we're basically adding about 200 subscriptions a week now.
Right.
So that's a high run rate of either customer acquisitions. But at the same time, we have to do a great job of the customers we acquired and growing their consumption.
Right.
And that's all about how do we make the product easier to use, how do we engage with the customer with some of the sales resource investments we made so that we can actually help them accelerate their consumption to the cloud. And so those are all things we just have to go continuously execute on. But it is really upon the market momentum is clearly behind us, and so it's really upon us to seize the opportunity.
Excellent. Changing gears over to SQL Server. Who do you see as the biggest direct competitors to SQL Server? How would you compare yourself against what Oracle delivers today, Aurora delivers today?
So we think we have a really disruptive value proposition with particularly SQL Server 2016. If you think about all the value and capability we've added to the product, whether it be our in-memory capability so you can do advanced analytics right on top within the database, all the in-memory OLTP performance improvements we made, or the in-memory BI, all these capabilities we added would have been essentially an add-on product in the Oracle product realm.
Right.
And so if we've documented, ROI differences where the total cost of ownership is, we are basically 12x cheaper. So we are really bringing on a differentiated value prop to the table, and folks like Gartner really recognizes us in the sense that we're like the tippy top right top corner in their Magic Quadrant now 2 years in a row.
Right.
And so we're sort of bringing that increased value proposition to the table, and really are seeing an opportunity to both grow the business, both from our existing base, but also by taking share.
Excellent. What do you see as the key differentiators in the new version of SQL Server that could drive further adoption?
Well, the TCO value difference in the capabilities we bring, I just talked about, I think in and of itself is a big lever. Another one that it's worth talking about, and goes to my previous statements around hybrid, is that we really are thinking deeply about what it means to deliver hybrid capabilities. So in SQL 2016, you can actually deploy SQL 2016 on-prem and have some basically set policies on what portions of your table get encrypted and stored in the cloud, while your application can remain unchanged,
right,
where the database would basically provide a unified query back from the data that sits across your on-prem and cloud.
Right.
And that's an example of how we're delivering a true example, a really rich example of hybrid use cases where our on-prem sales motions can really catalyze also a dialogue around the cloud in a way that makes sense for the customer. So it's not, SQL 2016 isn't just a growth opportunity for SQL sort of licensed business per se, but it's also a great way to engage customers in the cloud.
Excellent. Office 365, you have the E3 version, you have the E5 version in market today. What do you see as the core things that are driving are going to drive people to E5, and is that where you end? Is there a future possibilities of keeping to expand up the market in terms of capabilities and price?
There are two answers I have on that. Actually, probably three. One is of the Office 365 E5 motion per se. Within that sort of product dialogue, we're just seeing a tremendous amount of customer reaction, particularly around our security value proposition. Because we approach security not as a bolt-on product, but essentially intrinsic to securing the workload, and customers want the secure Office 365 workload. The security elements of Office 365, particularly on things like advanced threat protection, is really resonating, and that security portion of the E5 value proposition, I think, is going really well. And then, we can certainly do a lot more to accelerate the adoption of essentially the analytics and voice capabilities, where we are really happy with the fact that the way we're participating in the market, these are all big market opportunities where we have an opportunity to grow both in terms of advanced analytics and BI and also voice, and having E5 as a vehicle to do that gives us a lot of opportunity.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm just checking on time. So E5 gives you the opportunity, especially on the security side, and we've heard that earlier today from another speaker on how much that is resonating, security and compliance, et cetera. Analytics seems to be a part of it. How important is the voice capabilities within E5, and what more can you do there?
I'm not sure I'm sort of the best person to talk about our opportunity in voice, but again, it's a huge opportunity that has a horizontal application that essentially is necessary. It's not something that a small population of your employee base needs. It's something that everybody needs. And that has a lot of resonance and compatibility with the way we generally sell Office 365. And so we're just generally bullish on the opportunity. One of the things I'll talk about in terms of in relation to E5 is that not only is Office 365 E5 a great opportunity, but we're also helping the company rally around, particularly around this notion of security, by creating an offering called Secure Productive Enterprise that really makes it easy for customers to buy essentially our products across Windows, Office, and EMS all together. And that essentially, from an upsell opportunity from a security perspective, and making making it easy for customers to buy and transact with us, a solution that essentially protects their Windows device, protects their mobile device, protect their Office 365 environments across their endpoints. That actually is something that we're very bullish on.
Excellent. Let me see if there's another question from the audience, and then I will continue. Yes.
So, can I just ask if you got some early feedback on the Azure Stack? I think probably on the preview right now. How's the customer feedback on that?
So the question is on the Azure Stack and where you are and what the customer feedback has been.
The customer interest and feedback on Azure Stack has been tremendous. We've just seen, I forget the exact number, but certainly higher than expected numbers we had in terms of the downloads and customers that are trying them out. And we've just dropped essentially a technical preview 2 at Ignite a month ago. And the customer feedback and the interest in our strategy of really delivering a hybrid cloud solution where you can both use the public cloud services that we have, as well as create an environment that's highly compatible with what we offer in public cloud on premises, is resonating really well.
Excellent. So let me ask a little more on Azure, since there's obviously a lot of questions in the space. Azure accelerated this quarter, being obviously quite bullish on the opportunity, companies building more data centers on it. What is driving it? Is it simply the fact that you're moving later, a little farther in the innings, and there's more people driving adoption? Is there some other magic going on in here?
I think it's sort of a combination of three factors. One is we are seeing quite healthy growth from our existing customers. So once customers get going on Azure, month over month, year over year, the consumption from the customer we've already acquired for Azure is going well, and that's the big driver of our consumption growth. Another one, of course, is that we are really focused, in addition to consumption growth, acquiring new customers, and I talked about 200,000 new subscription, and that's a sort of a metric we look at in terms of what's the velocity of the customer acquisition, because we all need to get customers started. Initial consumption might be small, but we have to get them going as quickly as possible, and so that can grow over time. And then thirdly, as consumption grows, we are seeing a really healthy growth in our premium services. As the consumption growth happens in the customer, their use patterns and use cases become more sophisticated. So perhaps it may have been originally just, sort of the base compute, storage, and network initially, but we're seeing, good growth in things that we call Azure Premium services, like database services or advanced analytics services or machine learning services, and we're seeing, I think, 9 consecutive quarters of triple-digit growth on those premium services that essentially is catalyzing consumption growth.
Excellent. And that move up the stack to the more premium versions, what are the things that are going to continue to drive that continuing improvement in premium? What can be done to add to that capabilities?
Well, I think it's 3 things. One is we certainly continue to have to invest in our product to make the product richer and better over time. Secondarily, we're seeing a nice ROI from some of the sales investments we made, in terms of really having dedicated resources that can engage deeply with customers in how they can more, use the cloud in deeper and more sophisticated ways, and continuing to sort of drive good returns from that is another one. And thirdly is the work that we're doing around our ISV ecosystem, where the more we have all this tech, but then what are the solutions that ISVs and partners and SI partners build in terms of practices that deliver value to the end customer, and building that ecosystem flywheel going can further accelerate that consumption.
Microsoft's always been a very partner-centric organization. Obviously, initially you were selling the cloud predominantly direct. Now you're selling, I guess, a lot through the cloud. How do you see that mix? What do you do to keep driving that ecosystem to get bigger and better?
You're absolutely right. We're very we have a strong DNA as a company in being very partner-centric, and it's really important for the cloud because, particularly when you think about a product like Azure, it's not like end customers wake up and say, I want a virtual machine or a database. It's all in furtherance of a solution, and that solution comes in the form of a solution that the customer develops by themselves, but more likely it could be from an ISV or an SI partner implementing it for them. And so the notion of really cultivating a partner ecosystem to be able to better take advantage of the cloud and where invest is important to us, and that's part of the reason we're investing in new business models like the CSP partner program, which enables our partners to essentially deliver a finished service from their end, building on top of Microsoft Cloud Services, not just Azure, but also Office 65 and Dynamics 365.
Most of the SaaS vendors have to this point taken a direct-only model. Many of the infrastructure PaaS vendors have taken almost a shopping cart. Let me, pick a couple of these things and drop into. Why do you have it? Can you drill a little more the advantages of the approach you're taking today, and what the long-term payout to Microsoft is from that?
Well, there are 2 ways to think about it. One is we certainly would like to engage with these SaaS vendors as a customer, so that they deliver their SaaS, perhaps even unbeknownst to the customer that it runs on Azure, but Azure is being consumed underneath. That's a key engagement model for us. And we've announced things like our partnership with Adobe as an example, where they're bringing their Marketing Cloud, Document Cloud, Creative Cloud, those are all SaaS solutions, to Azure. And that's an important opportunity for us. But at the same time, like I said before, no app, particularly in the enterprise, can live in a silo. That data has to be shared, and the application has to integrate with other systems. And so there is an opportunity for us to basically provide a platform that both SaaS application vendors and customers use collectively so that they can share data. And that, I think, is sort of the best of both worlds.
Excellent. So you've obviously started out with a purely Microsoft-centric offering in Azure. You've expanded it by adding third-party and open-source databases and other technologies. How do you think through what to add, when to add it, and whether you add it just simply as something that is available on a virtual machine versus something that's more of a platform play?
I think we are certainly striving to be incredibly feedback-driven.
Right.
Rather than having teams sit in Redmond and think about what technology to add next. We actually have a lot of signals we get from our own consumption. We can see, okay, where are people stuck in their consumption? Can we improve their documentation? Can we improve better samples? Can we have so many points of data to be able to collect. Even in our own documentation, I don't know whether you know this, but all of our core documentation now also is on GitHub.
Right.
And anybody in the community, anybody on the internet can basically sort of give us feedback on, hey, we need things like this, or we need more capabilities like this, or you need to document how this is done. And essentially that can be commented in GitHub in an open way, and our teams look at it and then say, hey, how can we actually take that as a feedback to either improve our documentation, improve the way our products are presented, or essentially change capabilities of the product. And I think we're being really feedback-driven, given that we now feel like we have critical mass of footprint in each of our communities. GitHub recently gave us an award for being one of the biggest contributors to their code base because we also contribute to their code too.
Right.
And so this engagement model that we have with a broader set of communities and being really feedback-driven is, I think, the way we're going to drive it.
And so the same feedback type loop is being used as to we need to add XYZ's brand Linux or some open source or some, NoSQL database. It's based on customer
Absolutely.
interest.
Yeah, totally.
And so the more the customer interest, you're constantly monitoring that to make a decision of it. And the way you think about it, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but can I ask, does Microsoft think about purely from a consumption model, and therefore whether they're consuming someone else's or they're consuming Microsoft's, that's something we want to chase after?
Yeah, I think, like I said, we've gotten really clear, particularly around Azure, that consumption is our prime directive.
Right.
And so, of course, we like our own software too.
Right.
We love it if people use our software in our cloud. That's kind of the best case.
Right.
But at the same time, we are going to basically sort of be clear on the fact that it's prime directive consumption. So particularly for many of our customers, it's not like they're really picking between two technologies. They already have a preferred technology, and they're saying, hey, how can I use Azure for this? And so it really makes sense for us to basically be where they are.
Right.
And then sort of basically try to embrace all the things that people want to do, whether it's OSS technology from a language and framework or operating system standpoint or database standpoint, and be as big tented as humanly possible.
So is that the reason why the push to have SQL on Linux?
That's certainly one of the elements. We also saw a great opportunity to add value, frankly, because some of the capabilities we have in SQL is really great.
Right.
And how do we actually deliver it to more set of developers so they can write applications that are exploitive of all this in-memory capability or all this advanced analytics capability?
Right.
And this essentially, again, addresses the TAM for SQL.
Okay.
Expands the TAM for the SQL business.
And so, given the market expansion from purely traditional SQL databases into now NoSQL and Hadoop databases and all the rest of it, how should you think about that? Do you think of this as being SQL opportunity for you're in the traditional market and then these other variants into other parts of the market? Do you think of SQL moving into being able to support what was more non-traditional because you've added some capabilities in that respect?
Mm-hmm. Well, again, we certainly are working to expand the relevance of the product. So when you think about a lot of the capabilities like Hadoop, we've added capabilities in SQL 2016 called Polybase, for example, that allows you to basically write a query across your relational databases and your non-relational data sources in a unified way.
Right.
And then you get sort of a unified result back. That's another way to continue to essentially expand the aperture in which SQL can be useful. At the same time, we're also directly embracing a lot of the NoSQL type technologies as well. We have things like DocDB as a service in the cloud, and we've basically made the APIs for DocDB compatible with Mongo APIs so that if you're familiar with MongoDB, you can actually use DocDB, essentially exactly in the same way you're already familiar using MongoDB as an example. So, across our database data technology portfolio, we have a broad base of technology from, not just SQL, but other capabilities like DocDB. We have HD Insights, which is essentially a managed Hadoop service, and even more advanced technologies like Azure Data Lake, which is highly differentiated in the sense that now you have a fully managed service where you can literally put in petabyte objects, and the system would handle sort of the sharding of storage and queries automatically for you. And so we have this broad portfolio, again, all in furtherances of recruiting more applications and data to be leveraging Azure.
So given the breadth and depth of what you're offering, can you give a sense of how much of that was traditionally 5 or 10 years ago addressable by what Microsoft sold?
I guess many of the new things were particularly the things that that exist only on Azure probably would not have been addressable previously. These are all net new TAM expansions. And also when you think about, this is why I go back to, don't think just about Azure versus AWS in the sense that, the way we're really, I spend a lot of my time thinking about Microsoft Cloud holistically. So, for example, Azure Data Lake technology originally sort of started off with some of the capabilities that was originally built for Bing in terms of having a huge data store that's capable of indexing the internet. And that technology was originally used first party only for Bing. But now the market expanded to have more people require that level of capability, and we figured out a way to essentially offer it as a commercial service on Azure. And so this isn't just the work of the Azure team showing up in Azure. It's a lot of the cross-Microsoft teams capabilities showing up through Azure. Things like face detection or emotion detection is all very similar in the sense that it's essentially a way for the Microsoft as a company to surface investments we made in places like Microsoft Research that can now shine through the lens of Azure. And there's a lot of capabilities that we offer in Office 365 that is essentially engineered by the Azure engineering team that shows up. And so we're trying to be really customer-centered in the way of don't package and monetize products based on what engineering team did the work, to essentially think more flexibly about, regardless of which engineering team does the work, what's the best place for it to show up for the customer, whether it's in Office 365 or Azure. And that's why we're really sort of rallying around Microsoft Cloud as a whole in the way we're running the business.
And that cloud reach is not just commercial cloud. You're then feeding that into some of the, the Bing and the Windows Live and the Xbox Live and everything else.
Cross-pollinating where appropriate.
Yeah.
But of course, when you make it a commercial offering, we'll have to go through all the compliance and certification and security. That's the value that the Azure team often adds in commercializing technology. But I just wanted to give this example as a way to think about how Microsoft Cloud is really a manifestation of Microsoft engineering capacity showing up in a way that makes sense for customers regardless of where the engineering org is.
Okay. So, and that's significantly different from what we saw many years before within Microsoft.
I do think this whole notion of being more customer-centric and having engineering output show up through customers in the packaging that makes sense is something that we're increasingly getting better at.
Okay. And your speed to market in terms of going from an idea to something in there, is that also improving through the changes in the development strategies and processes?
Yeah, I mean, I've been at the company 19 plus years, and at no time have I experienced the speed with which we are delivering new capabilities. And in fact, one of the things we're constantly working on is how do we keep our partner ecosystem and our own sellers and field and partners all trained up and up to date on the level of new things coming down at a ferocious rate. And you could argue that's a good problem to have, but it is something we have to work on because we want to make sure that the product and the customer representation of the product is reflecting, the latest and greatest.
Right. Okay. So I guess that's also part of the value prop is you can get the clients from going from on-premise to running either hybrid cloud or pure cloud, for lack of a better word. that the clients are going to be able to get much faster, more capabilities, new improvements, et cetera, on it. Is that having that feedback into the traditional on-prem customers and driving an acceleration of them upgrading to the latest versions of Windows Server, SQL Server, et cetera?
Well, that's certainly our intent, and
Right.
that's what we're trying to execute against.
Excellent. Are there any other questions from the audience? Yes.
I'm sure it's a difficult question to answer, but I'll try. Fortune 500 company running on AWS today, you and your business, what's the cost for them to switch over and what time required to switch over?
So the question is, for a Fortune 500 company running on AWS decides to move over to Azure, what's the cost to do it? What's the time to do it?
So I'll ask. The answer for that is in many aspects, our conversation with the customers aren't necessarily about switching what they've already done. It's about like your next workload. You may have already done this, but for your next project, like cloud penetration, cloud consumption is happening at such a rate that oftentimes it's far less about switching, but it's far more about the next opportunities, what's the net new. And increasingly customers, particularly those that may have invested heavily in AWS, is definitely looking at a multi-cloud strategy. And they're like saying, hey, I just want to make sure that I'm not single vendored in the cloud, and I want to be able to manage a portfolio that sits across different clouds. And that also, of course, gives us an opportunity to say, hey, now your next project is going to be, perhaps you should relook the one you've done before. But our first, the likelihood of success isn't to focus on the switch, but to actually focus on the next workload.
So that would imply that the amount of greenfield opportunity is massive at this point compared to the ability or interest in taking from one cloud vendor to another.
Right now, I certainly believe the market expansion and momentum is such that the growth does not necessarily have to come at the expense of the other.
Okay. So does that mean that we're just not going to see?
That doesn't mean there aren't competitive situations. That doesn't mean there aren't competitive bids.
Right.
There's always procurement,
Right.
experts in every company, and so we get to earn our business for sure.
Right.
But also at the same time, it's not necessarily about always a switch is required for us to win.
Right. Okay. Much of it is not switch. One last question, I think, from the audience.
You announced some price cuts on October 1st for the lowest part of Azure, which is 30 to 50% of some workloads. And particularly this price cut did not come on the heels of US price cut itself announced. Any thoughts about that and how that impacts your growth going forward?
Yeah, let me explain through what we've done in terms of essentially simplifying our pricing in October, which is what we really have done. It may have come across as a price reduction, but it's really a simplification in the sense that we have historically had Azure pricing that was somewhat different based on the contractual mechanism you used to buy Azure. And when we basically are in seeing a lot of growth, particularly from customers that we may have not traditionally engaged with us before. We've learned that a lot of them actually don't know to sort of check all of our channels of distribution and find out the greatest price, because they're maybe a startup, they may be a relatively unengaged customer with the Microsoft sort of distribution mechanism. And so in order to make sure that we simplify our pricing model, particularly for Azure, so that we reach new audiences in the most price competitive way, because we were already price competitive, in the way we priced it overall, but it wasn't the most visible on the website. So we just simplified it so that the website prices basically reflect the offers we have in other channels.
Excellent. So I do apologize. We're going to have to cut it here at this point. Takashi, thank you so much. I really appreciate all your time and effort.
Thank you very much.